5 minutes before the quarterly finance meeting, my index finger froze mid-scroll. There on my monitor glowed a group chat titled Stupid Accent Memes, with 347 unread messages. My vision narrowed to pinpoints as thumbnails of my face appeared, crudely edited with phonetic spellings of words I'd spoken in meetings. 3 years of private jokes about how I pronounced algorithm and statistical analysis. My coworkers had accidentally added me when they urgently needed my system credentials to access the quarterly metrics. Data only I had permission to retrieve. A message from Tanner popped up. "Hello. We need those numbers now. The executive board is walking in." I watched my trembling hand hover over the keyboard as another notification appeared. The CFO responding to the group. "I see all your messages about my niece." The air vanished from my lungs. They didn't know. Nobody knew. I'd kept that connection private since the day I started. Now, 27 faces would turn toward me when I walked into that conference room, wondering exactly what I planned to do with their careers. Before I tell you what happened next, understand this. I never wanted revenge. I wanted respect. There's a difference. One I'd spend the next 3 weeks teaching them in exquisite detail. If you've ever been underestimated, mocked, or pushed aside while watching less qualified people take credit for your work, I promise this story will feel like justice served on a silver platter. My name is Nyvene Tasakor. I immigrated to America 7 years ago with a mathematics degree and specialized certification in predictive financial analysis. I grew up in a small mountainous village in Georgia, not the state, the country nestled between Russia and Turkey. My childhood was spent helping my grandfather tend beehives, while my grandmother taught me calculus using patterns in nature. By 12, I could calculate the volume of irregular shapes by observing how rainwater collected in stone formations. In my home country, I was respected for my intellectual gifts. 3 universities competed to enroll me, and I graduated with highest honors despite working 2 jobs to support my family after my father's unexpected passing. My professors said my approach to applied mathematics was revolutionary. I declined 2 government positions to pursue opportunities in America, believing my skills would transcend language barriers. I was wrong. From my first day at Absolute Analytics, I noticed how conversations shifted when I approached. My team members Tanner, Phoebe, Gretchen, and Imani would be laughing, then suddenly become professional when I entered the break room. I attributed it to cultural differences. Perhaps my directness made them uncomfortable? Maybe my formal dress style seemed odd compared to their casual attire? I tried harder to connect. I brought traditional Georgian khachapuri pastries. I invited them to a Georgian dance performance downtown. I offered to teach them phrases from my language. They declined politely each time, citing prior commitments. I accepted their excuses at face value because, in my culture, we believe in assuming good intentions. The head of our department, Kareth, seemed different. He praised my analytical frameworks in meetings but never acknowledged my contributions when speaking with his superiors. My algorithms improved company forecasting by 23%, yet his presentations never mentioned my name. When I created a new risk assessment model that saved the company millions, Kareth patted Tanner on the back during the executive meeting. "Exceptional work," he'd said, while Tanner smiled and nodded. I remained silent, telling myself visibility wasn't important. Results were what mattered. Besides, I knew the chief financial officer, Dahlia Corvell, had access to the system logs. She could see who created which models. She knew the truth. What I never told anyone was that Dahlia was my mother's sister's daughter, my first cousin. She'd recommended me for the position but insisted on professional boundaries. "Your work must speak for itself," she'd said. I agreed completely. For 3 years, I arrived at 7 a.m. and left after 8 p.m. I skipped lunch to run additional analyses. I developed proprietary algorithms that transformed raw financial data into actionable forecasts. I spoke 7 languages, which allowed me to communicate directly with international clients and partners instead of waiting for translators. German automotive executives, Japanese investment firms, Brazilian agricultural cooperatives, they all had my direct number because I could discuss complex financial concepts in their native tongues. The week before the quarterly meeting, I overheard Kareth discussing upcoming promotions with his assistant. We need someone with emotional stability and natural leadership presence, he'd said. Nyvene is too technical, too detached. Clients need someone they can relate to. The words stung, but I accepted the critique. Perhaps I did focus too much on numbers and not enough on relationships. I resolved to demonstrate more interpersonal warmth. Then came the morning of the quarterly meeting. I arrived early as usual, preparing to extract the financial metrics everyone would need for their presentations. My special access existed because I'd designed the secure database architecture, another fact few people acknowledged. That's when the chat notification appeared. Now, sitting in that conference room, surrounded by executive board members and the coworkers who'd spent years mocking me, I maintained perfect posture. My expression revealed nothing as Kareth introduced the quarterly presentation. We're especially excited about our predictive modeling this quarter, he announced. The team has developed unprecedented accuracy in market forecasting. Tanner stood, clicking through slides filled with my graphs, my calculations, my innovations. Phoebe joined him, explaining the methodology I'd created over hundreds of late nights. Gretchen detailed client applications that had resulted from my direct consultations in their native languages. I watched them present my life's work while 20 sets of eyes focused on them admiringly. Only Dahlia occasionally glanced in my direction, her expression unreadable. When they finished, polite applause filled the room. The CEO, Harlow Winter, nodded appreciatively. Impressive work. This puts us years ahead of competitors. Dahlia cleared her throat. Before we move on, I have a question about the algorithmic approach. The system logs show these models were created by, she consulted her tablet, Nyvene's credentials. Perhaps she could explain the methodology? Silence crashed into the room. Kareth's smile flickered. Tanner froze mid-reach for his water glass. Oh, Kareth recovered quickly. Nyvene assisted with data entry. The conceptual framework was developed by the team. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, but clarity. A lifetime of deferring, of believing competence would eventually be recognized, crystallized into a single moment of decision. Actually, I said, my voice calm, I would be happy to explain my methodology. I stood and walked to the front of the room. Instead of taking the clicker from Tanner, I pulled up a new window on the presentation screen. The back-end system logs showing creation dates, user credentials, and modification history for every element of the quarterly analysis. This proprietary algorithm functions through a 3-tiered authentication system I designed. I explained, my accent suddenly more pronounced than usual. The mathematical foundation draws from non-linear regression modeling I developed during my studies in Georgia. For 10 minutes, I detailed the complex financial architecture underlying their simplified presentation. I explained how my cultural perspective allowed me to identify market patterns invisible to conventional Western analysis. I demonstrated how my linguistic abilities created direct client relationships that generated 17% more revenue than accounts managed through translators. When I finished, the room remained silent. Harlow Winter leaned forward. Why haven't I met you before, Nyvene? Before I could answer, Kareth interrupted. Nyvene is incredibly valuable in her current role. She's more comfortable with numbers than people, which is why we've kept her focused on back-end analysis. Is that true? Harlow asked me directly. I smiled. Perhaps you could test that theory. For the next 5 minutes, I'm happy to discuss our European market strategy in any language you prefer. Harlow's eyebrows rose. German? My background is in Berlin banking. I nodded and launched into fluent German, explaining how our predictive models identified 3 emerging opportunities in specialized manufacturing. After 2 minutes, I switched to French to address our Canadian board member, then Mandarin for another, and finally Japanese for our newest investor. When I finished, I returned to English. I speak 7 languages fluently because mathematics is universal, but business is personal. My accent exists because my brain processes multiple linguistic structures simultaneously, the same cognitive flexibility that allows me to create these algorithms. Harlow turned to Kareth. You've had this talent hidden in a back office for 3 years? The atmosphere in the room shifted. Dahlia hadn't revealed our connection, but her pointed question had created this opening. Now I had to decide exactly how to proceed. I could demand justice, have the chat transcript displayed for everyone. I could name names and watch careers implode. The power was suddenly mine. But revenge wasn't what I wanted. If you've been enjoying this story so far, take a quick second to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Click that bell icon too, because what happens next changed not just my career, but my entire perspective on professional justice. Trust me, the way I handled those coworkers was so much more satisfying than simply getting them fired. The meeting ended with Harlow requesting a private conversation with me later that afternoon. As everyone filed out, Tanner approached, face pale. "Nyvene, about that chat group," he started. "We'll discuss it tomorrow," I said quietly, "after I meet with Harlow." Phoebe and Gretchen exchanged nervous glances near the door. Imani stared at the floor. Kareth attempted to join Harlow and Dahlia's conversation, but they walked away, deep in discussion about international expansion. I gathered my materials calmly, though inside, my thoughts raced through possibilities. For years, I'd believed my work would eventually speak for itself. Now I understood that wasn't enough. Systems protect themselves. People protect their positions. Merit alone rarely overcomes entrenched advantage. Back at my desk, I pulled up the chat history again. 3 years of messages mocking my pronunciation. Screenshots of emails with words circled and laughing emojis. Videos from meetings where they'd zoomed in on my face when I struggled with certain sounds. They'd created polls about which accent mistake was funniest that week. The most recent messages were panicked. "Tanner, did you add Nyvene to this chat?" Phoebe, "OMG no." Imani, delete it, delete it." Gretchen, "We can't. We need her to see the login request." Tanner, "Make a new chat." Phoebe, "Too late, she's reading it, look at the status." Then Dahlia's single message, "I see all your messages about my niece." They hadn't known about our connection. Nobody had. I'd honored Dahlia's request for professional boundaries so completely that most assumed I had no connections within the company. At 3 p.m., I entered Harlow's office. Dahlia was already seated. They motioned for me to join them. "First," Harlow said, "I want to apologize for what appears to be a significant failure in our company culture. Dahlia has shown me the chat history." I nodded, maintaining my composure. "Second, I'd like to understand why you've remained in your current position despite clearly being qualified for advancement." I considered my words carefully. I believed performance would eventually be recognized. In my culture, patience and perseverance are highly valued. Perhaps I was too patient. Harlow nodded thoughtfully. "And what would you like to happen now?" This was the moment. I could demand terminations. I could seek maximum punishment. Instead, I took a deep breath. "I'd like structural change, not individual penalties," I said. "The problem isn't just 4 people in a chat group. It's a system that rewards certain types of visibility while devaluing others." For the next hour, we discussed reorganization possibilities. By the end, Harlow had offered me a new position, Global Communications Director, overseeing all international client relationships and analytics integration. The role would report directly to the executive committee, bypassing Kareth entirely. "One more thing," I added as our meeting concluded. "I'd like to implement mandatory language training for all client-facing staff. In today's global economy, monolingualism is a competitive disadvantage." Harlow smiled. "Excellent idea. You'll oversee the program development?" I nodded. "I'll need flexibility in scheduling and implementation." That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at the city lights. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter, not just for my career, but for how I valued myself. For too long, I'd believed that quiet competence would eventually be rewarded. Now I understood that visibility wasn't vanity. It was necessary protection. My phone buzzed with a message from Dahlia. "I hope you know I wanted to tell them about the chat months ago. You asked me not to interfere." I replied, "Thank you for respecting my wishes then, and for supporting me today." Another message arrived. "What will you do about them?" I smiled as I typed, teach them. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find an official announcement in my inbox. Effective immediately, I would assume the role of Global Communications Director with a substantial salary increase and corner office. The email concluded with a personal note from Harlow. Your patience has been admirable. Your restraint even more so. Now show us what you can really do. By 9 a.m., my phone buzzed constantly with congratulatory messages from colleagues who had barely acknowledged my existence before. Peculiar, how success suddenly makes you visible. I responded politely to each one while preparing for my first executive committee meeting at 10. As I gathered my materials, Tanner appeared in my doorway, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Nyvene, can we talk privately? His voice had lost its usual confidence. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Of course. He sat, eyes darting around the room before settling somewhere near my left shoulder. About that chat group, it wasn't what it looked like. It looked like 347 messages mocking my accent and cultural background. I replied calmly. What was it actually? His face flushed. It started as just stupid jokes. We never meant to hurt me or for me to find out. The question hung between us. Tanner had no answer. The language training program begins next Monday, I said, changing the subject. As Global Communications Director, I'll be personally conducting the first series of sessions. Relief flooded his face. This wasn't the confrontation he'd feared. That's great. Which languages? Georgian and Russian to start. Essential for our Eastern European expansion. Sessions begin at 6 a.m. to accommodate international time zones. The relief vanished. 6 in the morning? Every day? For 3 months. Attendance is mandatory for anyone working with international clients. I smiled. Or anyone seeking promotion in the next fiscal year. Understanding dawned in his eyes. 6 a.m. language training taught by the woman whose accent they'd ridiculed for years. The elegance of the consequence wasn't lost on him. Who will be in these sessions? He asked carefully. The executive committee has approved my list of priority participants. I handed him a printed schedule. You'll be joining Phoebe, Gretchen, Imani, and Kareth in Group A. I've noted your particular difficulty with Slavic consonant clusters based on your chat comments about my pronunciation of statistical probability. His face reddened. You've read all of it. Every message, I confirmed. Quite educational to see myself through your eyes. I particularly appreciated your Halloween costume last year. The fake accent and exaggerated gestures were quite creative, though anatomically impossible. Tanner stared at his hands. I'm sorry. I know. I stood, gathering my materials. Your performance will be evaluated weekly. Those making insufficient progress will require additional weekend sessions. After he left, I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction, not because I sought to punish them, but because justice sometimes requires uncomfortable growth. They would learn my language with the same diligence I had learned theirs. They would struggle with unfamiliar sounds while I gently corrected them, exactly as they should have done for me. The following Monday, I arrived at 5:30 a.m. to prepare the conference room. I arranged dictionaries, workbooks, and audio equipment with meticulous care. At precisely 6 a.m., my 5 students shuffled in, clutching coffee cups and avoiding eye contact. Good morning, I greeted them in Georgian. Welcome to your first language immersion experience. For the next 2 hours, I introduced them to the Georgian alphabet, 33 letters, many bearing no resemblance to Latin characters. I demonstrated proper tongue placement for sounds that don't exist in English. When Kareth complained that certain consonant combinations seemed physically impossible, I played recordings of 5-year-old Georgian children speaking fluently. What's challenging for adults is natural for children, I explained. Your struggle isn't intelligence, but neuroplasticity. The brain resists new pathways after certain ages. By the end of the first week, frustration simmered in every session. Phoebe nearly cried when unable to pronounce a simple greeting after 20 attempts. Gretchen developed a headache trying to distinguish between similar-sounding consonants. Imani actually improved quickly but pretended otherwise, perhaps fearing social exclusion from the others. Kareth proved the most resistant. This is absurd, he muttered during our second week. I'll never use Georgian in actual business contexts. I switched to Russian immediately. Then perhaps you'll find this more professionally relevant. I replied in that language. Russia represents a significant emerging market for our financial products. His confusion at my sudden language switch confirmed what I already knew. He understood neither language and couldn't even differentiate between them, despite 7 training sessions. You've been marking me as needs improvement on every evaluation, he said accusingly. Yes. I'm department head. These evaluations go in my permanent file. Yes. I maintain direct eye contact, just as your performance reviews of me have been in my file for 3 years. Throughout these morning sessions, my professional transformation continued. My new position granted access to client relationships previously hidden from me. I discovered Kareth had taken credit for my work with our Japanese partners, partnerships I'd cultivated through late-night calls conducted entirely in Japanese. He'd represented himself as the analytical mind behind strategies I'd developed. Rather than expose him immediately, I invited our Japanese clients to a video conference, with Kareth present. When they spoke to him in Japanese, expecting the fluency they'd experienced in previous calls, his confusion revealed the truth without me saying a word. They switched to English and addressed me directly for the remainder of the meeting. By the 3rd week of language training, something unexpected happened. Imani approached me after class. I've been practicing outside of sessions, she admitted quietly. My grandmother was from Belarus. She tried teaching me Russian when I was little, but I wasn't interested then. I nodded, surprised by this revelation. I was in that chat group, she continued, but I never posted anything. I should have spoken up. I was afraid of becoming their target instead. Fear keeps many people silent, I acknowledged. I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said, but I want you to know I'm genuinely sorry. That afternoon, I reviewed the complete chat history again. Imani had indeed never posted a mocking message, though she'd remained in the group. A passive participant, but not an active contributor. I made a note to speak with Harlow about reassigning her to my direct team. The following day brought another development. An email from Harlow announced the quarterly performance bonus structure had been revised. International clients now carried premium commission rates, with 15% allocated to the employee who conducted business in the client's native language. This meant every deal I'd closed over the past 3 years would retroactively generate substantial bonuses for me. It also meant my language students suddenly had financial incentive to master their training. Those who succeeded could significantly increase their compensation. Those who failed would watch others advance financially while they stagnated. During that day's session, I noticed renewed effort from everyone except Kareth, who maintained his belief that English speakers shouldn't need to accommodate others. The irony of his position while struggling through a language class designed as consequence for mocking my accent seemed entirely lost on him. At the 6-week mark, Harlow requested a progress report. I provided detailed assessments of each participant, including audio recordings demonstrating their current abilities. Fascinating, Harlow said, after listening to their halting attempts at basic Georgian phrases. And how would you rate their progress overall? Tanner and Imani showed genuine effort. Phoebe and Gretchen remain resistant but are improving incrementally. Kareth appears to believe this is temporary punishment rather than essential professional development. Harlow studied me thoughtfully. You know, when Dahlia first showed me that chat history, I expected you to demand terminations. Firing them would change nothing, I replied. They would simply take their attitudes elsewhere. This way, they experience what I experienced, the vulnerability of linguistic struggle, the frustration of being judged on accent rather than content. And the department restructuring? I smiled, proceeding exactly as planned. The restructuring was perhaps the most elegant aspect of my approach. Rather than demoting anyone outright, I had proposed a matrix organization where international client teams would be formed based on language proficiency and analytical skill. The natural result, those excelling in language training would advance, while those resisting would find themselves increasingly isolated from premium client relationships. That afternoon, I conducted mid-quarter reviews with each team member. Tanner entered my office first, Georgian textbook clutched nervously in his hand. Gamarjoba, He greeted me in Georgian. His pronunciation, while imperfect, showed marked improvement. Gamarjoba, I responded. Your progress is notable. He nodded, then switched to English. I've been practicing 3 hours every night. My girlfriend thinks I'm crazy. Dedication often appears that way to others, I observed. Why the sudden commitment? Tanner hesitated. At first, it was fear. I thought if I excelled, you might forgive what happened in that chat. And now? Now I realize I've been the exact kind of American everyone mocks overseas, expecting the world to accommodate me rather than expanding my own capabilities. He paused. I never considered how difficult it was for you to conduct complex financial discussions in a language that wasn't your first. Progress, however self-interested, was still progress. I noted his improved attitude in my evaluation. Phoebe and Gretchen showed less personal growth during their reviews. They viewed the language requirement as punishment rather than opportunity, focusing on minimum requirements for compliance. Their technical skills remained valuable to the company, but their advancement potential had effectively plateaued unless their attitudes changed. Kareth's review proved most illuminating. He arrived with a folder of documents he placed on my desk triumphantly. I've spoken with legal about these language requirements, he announced. They constitute potential discrimination based on national origin. I reviewed the papers calmly. Interesting theory. However, we're requiring language proficiency from native English speakers, not discriminating against non-English speakers. The policy actually creates equity rather than undermining it. This is clearly targeted retaliation, he insisted. Perhaps you should discuss that with Harlow, I suggested. I believe the executive committee unanimously approved these requirements, based on documented business needs for international expansion. His confidence faltered. They don't know about the chat group. Don't they? The original chat included 27 people from various departments. Do you believe all of them maintained confidentiality after learning the CFO is my cousin? The realization that his behavior might be common knowledge among company leadership visibly unsettled him. What do you want from me? He finally asked. Professional respect and appropriate attribution of work, I replied simply. The same courtesy extended to every other colleague. As he left, I reflected on how differently each person had responded to the same circumstances. Some recognized their behavior and sought to improve. Others looked for escape routes from accountability. The difference revealed character far more effectively than any interview or performance review ever could. The following week brought the International Client Conference, an annual gathering where our most significant global partners met with company leadership. In previous years, I'd attended only as technical support, running analyses behind the scenes while others presented my findings. This year, I stood at the podium introducing each session in the client's native language. I watched recognition dawn in the eyes of German, Japanese, and Brazilian executives as they realized I was the voice they'd spoken with regularly on calls, not the people who had previously taken credit for my work. During the evening reception, our most significant Japanese client, Hideo Kamamoto, approached me directly. For 3 years, I believed I was speaking with different people, he said in Japanese, the analysis expert on the phone and the man who appeared at meetings. There was confusion about roles, I replied diplomatically. He smiled. No confusion now. Your new position brings clarity. We would like to expand our relationship under your direct management. By the conference's end, I had secured commitment for 3 major new international partnerships, each with the premium commission structure that would substantially increase my compensation while building my own team independent of Kareth's department. The morning after the conference concluded, I received an unexpected email from Kareth requesting a private meeting. Curious, I agreed to see him that afternoon. He arrived looking uncharacteristically humble. I've been offered a position at another firm, he said without preamble. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. Before I make my decision, I wanted to ask, is there a path forward for me here? The question surprised me. That depends on what path you're seeking. I've worked here for 11 years, he said, built my entire career in this company. But after the restructuring, I'm essentially managing a shrinking domestic division while you build the international future. That's an accurate assessment, I acknowledged. He took a deep breath. I could take this other offer. Start fresh somewhere no one knows about. What happened? Or I could stay and try to rebuild here, knowing advancement will be limited by my past actions. I considered his position carefully. This conversation represented something I hadn't anticipated, an opportunity to shape someone's future, rather than simply closing the book on their past. The language of business isn't just Georgian or Japanese or German, I said finally. It's accountability. Everyone makes mistakes. What defines us is how we respond when those mistakes are revealed. What would you do in my position? He asked. I would recognize that starting over elsewhere means carrying unresolved issues forward. I replied, I would consider that growth often happens precisely where we've experienced our greatest failures. He nodded slowly. I'm not taking the other position. I'd like to stay and properly learn international expansion from you, if you're willing to teach me. 2 months after discovering that chat group, I found myself in a position I could never have imagined. My salary had nearly doubled. I directed a growing international division. The quarterly bonus structure had delivered a substantial retroactive payment for years of unacknowledged work. Most importantly, the company culture had undergone a fundamental shift. The language training program expanded beyond my original students to include dozens of eager participants. Those who had mocked my accent now struggled through the same linguistic challenges I had faced, but with structured support rather than ridicule. Tanner eventually became one of my most dedicated students, mastering basic Georgian and moving on to Russian with surprising aptitude. Imani joined my direct team, her previously hidden talents flourishing under proper recognition. Phoebe and Gretchen remained in their original roles, neither advancing nor being penalized beyond their reduced access to premium international clients. Kareth's journey proved most surprising. Having chosen humility over escape, he enrolled in additional weekend language sessions voluntarily. His progress remained slower than others, but his commitment demonstrated genuine change. I assigned him to shadow me on calls with German clients, allowing him to observe properly attributed collaborative work. 3 months after the restructuring, Harlow called me to her office. Your approach has transformed this company, she said. International revenue is up 22%. Employee language proficiency has become a competitive advantage in markets where we previously struggled. Thank you, I replied, though I suspect you didn't call me here just to offer compliments. She smiled, perceptive as always. The board is considering a new executive position, Chief Global Strategy Officer. They've asked for my recommendation. And you're considering me, I concluded. You've demonstrated exceptional technical expertise alongside emotional intelligence and leadership capacity. The question is, are you interested? I thought about how far I'd come from that moment of discovery in the conference room. The journey hadn't been about revenge, but reclamation of my work, my dignity, my rightful place. Yes, I answered, on one condition. Which is? The new position includes oversight of company culture and inclusion initiatives. What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone else. Harlow nodded. I believe the board will find that entirely appropriate. As I left her office, I passed the conference room where my language class would gather the following morning. Through the glass, I could see the Georgian alphabet written on the whiteboard, symbols that had once been mine alone in this building, now studied by dozens. The most profound revenge wasn't getting anyone fired. It wasn't even my promotion or financial compensation. It was watching people who had mocked my difference struggle to master what I had made look easy. It was seeing them recognize, perhaps for the first time, that accent doesn't equal intelligence, that difference doesn't equal deficiency. Sometimes revenge isn't about destruction. Sometimes it's about reconstruction, building something better from the rubble of what was broken. My accent remained, but now it carried authority rather than invitation for ridicule. My cultural background became asset rather than liability. And that group chat? It still existed, preserved in company records as a reminder of where we had been and how far we had come. Not as a monument to humiliation, but as a milestone on the journey towards something approaching justice. Have you ever been underestimated, mocked, or pushed aside because of some aspect of your identity? Did you choose revenge or redemption when your moment of power arrived? Share your story in the comments below. And if this tale of professional justice resonated with you, subscribe for more real stories about navigating workplace challenges with dignity and strategic brilliance. Because sometimes the best response to those who underestimate you isn't telling them they're wrong, it's showing them one methodical step at a time.